Okay, Europe is dependent on Russia. Does Russia have the supply to refill the tanks that we need and supply Europe and meet their full demand?
Well, they certainly have the gas. The point is just how much pipeline capacity they will have to supply gas to Europe. And so at the moment, they've been using existing capacity, probably not up to just how much people would want them to supply. But what we think is that if they use all of that capacity, and they certainly have the gas for it, and the winter is relatively normal in Europe, we don't think Europe will have an issue in meeting demand. The question is whether the winter is going to be cold. That's certainly a different outlook.
What's the best case and worst case scenario here for Europe?
Well, again, so the best case, which it's normal weather condition across Europe, but also across Asia. And again, we think that under that condition, actually the market should end up the winter in a situation where storage are going to be lower than normal winter, but still in a relatively comfortable position. We estimate that could be in the range of 28 BCM, so quite high. But if you get a cold winter in Europe, that could add 20 BCM of demand. And if you get a cold winter in Asia, that could reduce LNG imports to Europe another 10 BCM. And so you've got 30 BCM in storage and an additional 20 BCM of demand for the winter in Europe and 10 BCM less LNG imports. You can do the math yourself. You end up with zero gas into storage. That's the worst scenario. And that's when only additional Russian gas can actually save the market.
Okay, so that's the worst case scenario, but I'm wondering if we're setting ourselves up for a one-way trade at this point in terms of volatility and higher prices. Like what happens if the winter is actually warmer, or we're still at 76% of storage capacity in Europe? That's not zero. Where's the risk? Where's the upside risk?
Well, the upside risk, I mean, to your point, if the winter is warmer than average, then actually demand could be some 10, 15 BCM lower than a normal weather condition. And so, and so in that case, we could actually end up in a situation where storage could be comfortably at the 35 BCM normal weather condition. So it's a very volatile situation. But I think what the market is really concerned on is the cold winter. And again, not knowing where the gas is going to come from if that happens.
In terms of individual countries, who's the most exposed here? The UK looks like it's kind of front and center right now. How different will each individual country be in Europe if we are going to see the worst case scenario? Is it going to be everybody's in the same boat, or are different countries going to fare differently?
I think in the spectrum of country, to your point, you've got the UK, which is going to be in a very perilous position, and that's because its storage capacity is extremely low compared to demand. There could be as much as only 10 days of storage demand left, in the winter, and so it would only be will fully be dependent on gas coming from Northwest Europe. And you can imagine that if the situation gets really bad, then whether that gas is going to flow to the UK might be questionable. On the other side, you've got Italy, where there is a requirement to put gas into storage, regardless of pricing dynamics. And so, to some extent, Italy is in a better position than other less regulated markets because, again, it's been able to fill up storage up to point. I mean, obviously, the market is all very well interconnected, but certainly on one extreme, you've got the UK, and on the other extreme, you've got Italy.
Walk me forward to next year, for example. What's the long-term effect of this going to be? Vladimir Putin was blaming the fact that Europe had been opting for more of spot market buys for LNG versus longer-term contracts. Obviously, Putin's going to be talking his book with Gazprom, but that's not an irrelevant point. We had been transitioning the market. Those 15, 20-year contracts were harder and harder to come by. Does that change now?
I think it's hard to think that we'll go back to to a lot of long-term contracts. I mean, there will be changes in contracting dynamics, right? So you will see buyers making sure that they've got access to LNG imports. But I think what can really save the market in a situation like this is effectively having more gas into storage. Is effectively something that the European Commission is trying to get warmer to, of the fact that one option to save the day, obviously not this winter, but as it builds up, is effectively try to develop additional storage, possibly regulated storage, and develop strategic reserves so that when we get back to situations like this, that could be the supplier of last resort. And certainly that could be a way to manage a situation like this, which again, if there is a cold winter, could really spiral to something unprecedented.
If we do get the worst case scenario, if we get close to the worst case scenario, how does demand destruction work? Presumably that's what we would have to see. How does the process of demand destruction work if there is not enough gas and gas prices are too high?
Well, if there is not enough gas, eventually, some of the gas that has been sold through interruptible contracts, and those are contracts that specifically consider the possibility of interrupting that supply, eventually some of those contracts will have to be triggered. Those are never really triggered because those are part of the agreement between buyers and sellers. But again, I think it's much more likely that some of those interruptible contracts will be triggered instead of Europe going down to zero storage. We'll certainly see that ahead of Europe going down to zero storage.